Marcus Callahan thought he'd seen the last of surprises when his wife Sarah passed away 3 years ago, leaving him alone on their sprawling Montana ranch with nothing but cattle, endless work, and sleepless nights that stretched into dawn. At 42, the weathered rancher had built walls around his heart thicker than the stone foundations of his century-old farmhouse. But on a frigid December morning, when 2 heavily pregnant women appeared at his doorstep through a blizzard that had knocked out power lines for miles, Marcus was about to discover that sometimes the universe has plans that no amount of barbed wire can keep out. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. What started as a simple act of shelter during a storm would unravel into something that challenged everything Marcus believed about second chances, family, and whether a man who'd sworn off love could find room in his guarded heart for not just 2 strangers, but the babies they were carrying. Because these weren't just any women seeking refuge. They were twin sisters with secrets, running from a past that threatened not only their lives, but the future of their unborn children. The wind howled across the Bitterroot Valley like a banshee that December morning, carrying with it the kind of snow that turned the world into an impenetrable white wall. Marcus Callahan pulled his wool-lined jacket tighter as he trudged through knee-deep drifts toward the main barn, his breath forming crystalline clouds that disappeared instantly in the bitter air. The thermometer outside his kitchen window had read -18 degrees when he'd stumbled out of bed at 5:30. Same as every morning for the past 3 years, sleep had become a stranger to Marcus since Sarah's funeral. Not because he couldn't fall asleep. Exhaustion from running a 2,000-acre cattle ranch single-handedly ensured that, but because every time he closed his eyes, he saw her face, sometimes laughing as she chased their border collie Rex around the yard, sometimes peaceful as she napped in the porch swing during those last good weeks before the cancer took hold. The memories were both blessing and curse, keeping her alive in his mind while reminding him daily that she was gone. The ranch had been Sarah's dream as much as his. They'd bought the property when they were 25, newlyweds with more ambition than sense, using every penny of their combined savings and a loan that made the bank manager nervous. Sarah had stood in the overgrown pasture that first day, her auburn hair catching the Montana sun, and declared it the most beautiful place on earth. Marcus had thought she was talking about the landscape, the rolling hills that stretched toward the Rocky Mountains, the pristine creek that wound through the property like a silver ribbon, the ancient cottonwoods that provided shade for cattle in summer. Years later, he realized she'd been talking about the life they would build there together. Now, alone except for his aging ranch hand Tommy Brennan, who came by 3 days a week, Marcus maintained the operation through sheer stubbornness. Cattle still needed feeding, fences still required mending, and equipment still broke down at the worst possible moments. Work had become his salvation and his prison, filling the daylight hours with purpose while leaving the nights empty and echoing. The barn door fought against the wind as Marcus yanked it open, the familiar smell of hay and livestock providing momentary comfort. His prize Angus cattle huddled together in their stalls, steam rising from their bodies in the frigid air. At least they were warm and fed. Marcus had learned to take satisfaction in these small victories, keeping his animals safe, maintaining the property his wife had loved, preserving something tangible from their life together. He was halfway through the morning feeding when Rex started barking from somewhere near the house. The old dog rarely made noise unless something was seriously wrong. Marcus set down the hay bale he'd been hauling and stepped outside, squinting through the swirling snow toward the sound. Rex's barks were urgent, insistent, coming from the direction of the front porch. Fighting his way through the drifts, Marcus rounded the corner of the house and stopped short. 2 figures huddled against his front door, barely visible through the storm. As he got closer, he could make out that they were women, both wearing inadequate coats for the brutal weather, both unmistakably pregnant. Very pregnant, the first. Woman looked up as he approached, her dark hair whipping around a face pale with cold and exhaustion. "Please," she called out, her voice barely audible over the wind. "We need help. Our car broke down about a mile back, and we've been walking for over an hour." Marcus didn't hesitate. Sarah would have had his hide if he'd left anyone out in weather like this, pregnant women especially. "Come on," he shouted back, gesturing toward the door. "Let's get you inside." The second woman was clearly struggling, leaning heavily on her companion as they made their way into the house. Once inside, with the door closed against the storm, Marcus got his first good look at his unexpected guests. They were twins, he realized, identical in most ways, though the first woman carried herself with more confidence despite their desperate circumstances. Both appeared to be in their late 20s, both in the final stages of pregnancy, and both looked like they hadn't slept in days. "I'm Elena Rodriguez," the first woman said, helping her sister out of a soaked jacket. "This is my sister Carmen. Thank you for letting us in. I wasn't sure we were going to make it much further." Carmen nodded gratefully but didn't speak, one hand pressed against her lower back, the other cradling her belly. Her breathing was labored, and Marcus noticed she was favoring her left leg. "Marcus Callahan," he replied, grabbing towels from the linen closet. "This is my ranch. How far along are you both?" 36 weeks, Elena answered. "Due around the same time New Year's Eve, if you can believe it. Carmen's having some contractions, but they're not regular yet. At least I hope they're not." Marcus felt his stomach tighten. He'd helped deliver plenty of calves over the years, but human babies were entirely different territory. "The nearest hospital is in Missoula, about 40 miles from here. But with this storm..." He glanced toward the window where snow continued to pile against the glass. "Roads are probably impassable right now." Elena followed his gaze, her expression growing worried. "How long do these storms usually last?" "Could be hours, could be days." Weather Service was calling for 2 feet of snow with 60-mile-per-hour winds. "This is the worst I've seen in 5 years." Marcus handed them the towels, trying to project calm despite his growing concern. "But you're safe here. I've got a generator, plenty of food, and the house is solid. Built in 1892. Weathered worse storms than this." Carmen finally spoke, her voice strained. "We're grateful, really. We just need somewhere to wait it out. We can pay you for the trouble." "No payment necessary," Marcus said firmly. "Let me get some coffee started and find you both some dry clothes. You're shivering." As he busied himself in the kitchen, Marcus couldn't help but wonder about their story. 2 pregnant women traveling alone in winter, carrying nothing but small purses, ending up stranded in one of the most remote areas of Montana. It didn't add up to a casual trip. Elena had mentioned a broken-down car, but he hadn't seen any headlights or heard any engine noise before Rex started barking. They'd appeared at his door like ghosts materializing from the storm. The coffee maker gurgled to life as Marcus pulled extra blankets from the hall closet. Sarah's old flannel pajamas were still in the bedroom dresser. He'd never been able to bring himself to donate her clothes. The sisters looked to be about her size. It felt strange offering Sarah's things to strangers, but she would have insisted. Sarah had never met a person in need she wouldn't help. When he returned to the living room, he found Elena pacing near the fireplace while Carmen sat heavily in Sarah's favorite armchair, the one positioned to catch the morning sun through the big picture window. The sight hit Marcus with unexpected emotion. He hadn't seen anyone in that chair since Sarah's last week, when she'd spent her final mornings there wrapped in quilts, watching the sunrise paint the mountains gold. "Here," he said, handing Elena the pajamas and blankets. "These should fit. Bathrooms down the hall, second door on the right. There's a shower if you want to warm up." Elena took the clothes gratefully. "You're incredibly kind. I know this must be an imposition." "It's not," Marcus replied, and meant it. Despite the complications their presence might bring, having people in the house again felt oddly comforting. The silence that had become his constant companion over the past 3 years suddenly seemed oppressive by comparison. Carmen shifted in the chair, wincing slightly. "Elena, I think the contractions are getting closer together." Elena's composure cracked for just a moment, revealing the fear underneath. "How much closer? Maybe every 10 minutes now?" "I'm not sure. They're definitely stronger." Marcus felt his pulse quicken. "I should call for medical advice at least. Even if an ambulance can't get through, maybe I can reach someone who can talk us through what to expect." He moved toward the landline phone. Cell service was spotty at best on the ranch, and the storm would make it worse. But when he lifted the receiver, there was no dial tone. The phone lines were down too. Elena saw his expression. "No phone service? Storm must have taken out the lines." "Happens sometimes with ice on the wires." Marcus tried to keep his voice steady. "But like I said, I've got experience with birthing. Different species, but some principles are the same." The attempt at lightness didn't seem to reassure anyone, least of all Marcus himself. He'd assisted with difficult cattle births, dealt with complications, even performed emergency procedures when veterinarians couldn't reach the ranch in time. But cattle didn't look at you with human eyes full of fear and hope. Cattle didn't have names or dreams or futures that depended on your skill with situations you'd never actually handled. Carmen had another contraction then, stronger than the previous ones, and Marcus watched Elena's face go pale as her sister gripped the arms of the chair and breathed through the pain. These babies weren't waiting for the storm to pass or for help to arrive. They were coming on their own schedule, in their own time, whether Marcus was ready or not. Outside, the wind continued its relentless assault on the old house, rattling windows and howling down the chimney. But inside, despite the uncertainty and fear, something had shifted. For the first time in 3 years, Marcus Callahan's home felt alive again. Sarah's chair was occupied, voices filled the rooms where only silence had lived, and life was literally about to make its entrance in the place where he'd spent so long dwelling with death and memory. As Elena helped Carmen toward the bathroom to change into dry clothes, Marcus began taking mental inventory of what they might need. Clean towels, hot water, sharp scissors, string for tying off umbilical cords. His first aid kit was extensive. Ranch life demanded it, but was it sufficient for delivering human babies? He wasn't sure, but he was about to find out. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The storm showed no signs of letting up, and Carmen's labor seemed to be progressing steadily. Whatever had brought these two women to his doorstep through a Montana blizzard, whatever secrets they might be carrying along with their babies, Marcus Callahan was committed now. He was going to help bring their children safely into the world, even if it meant confronting his own fears about life, loss, and the possibility that his carefully guarded heart might have room for more than just grief and memory. Sarah would have said it was fate. Marcus had always been more practical than his wife, more inclined to see coincidence where she saw destiny. But as he listened to the sisters talking quietly in the bathroom, as he prepared his home for the arrival of new life, he couldn't shake the feeling that this storm had brought more than just unexpected guests to his door. It had brought a chance, terrifying and unwanted, but undeniable, for everything to change. The storm's fury had only intensified by mid-afternoon, transforming Marcus's ranch into an island cut off from the world. Snowdrifts reached halfway up the barn doors, and the wind created an otherworldly howling that seemed to shake the very bones of the old house. But inside, a different kind of intensity was building as Carmen's contractions grew stronger and more frequent. Marcus had transformed his ground floor guest bedroom into a makeshift delivery room, gathering every clean sheet, towel, and piece of medical equipment he could find. The room had been Sarah's craft space before her illness, filled with half-finished, quilts and boxes of fabric that he'd never had the heart to move. Now it served a purpose Sarah would have approved of, becoming a sanctuary for new life. Elena paced the hallway outside, periodically checking on her sister before retreating to give her space. Marcus noticed how she carried herself, alert, watchful, as if constantly scanning for threats that might emerge from the storm. There was something military about her posture, a readiness that spoke of training or hard experience. When she thought no one was looking, her hand would drift to her lower back, and Marcus realized she might be carrying more than just pregnancy discomfort. "How are we doing there?" Marcus called through the partially open door. Carmen's voice came back strained but determined. "Still manageable." Elena timed them. They're about 7 minutes apart now. Elena appeared at Marcus's shoulder, her dark eyes reflecting worry she was trying hard to mask. "I need to tell you something," she said quietly, drawing him away from the door. "Carmen and I, we're not just traveling. We're running." Marcus had suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed sent a chill through him that had nothing to do with the weather. Running from what? From whom? Elena corrected. Carmen's ex-husband, David Vega. He's dangerous, violent. She finally left him 2 months ago when he put her in the hospital. That's when she found out she was pregnant. The pieces began falling into place. The lack of proper winter clothing, the absence of a car nearby, the way Elena constantly checked the windows. "And you're running together because—" Elena's hand moved unconsciously to her belly. "Because my situation isn't much better. The father of my baby is David's business partner. When I tried to help Carmen get away, I became a target too. They've been tracking us across 3 states. Marcus felt his jaw tighten. He'd seen domestic violence cases during his brief stint as a volunteer years ago, before he'd focused entirely on ranching. The stories always left him feeling helpless and angry. "How did you end up here specifically?" "We were trying to reach a women's shelter in Kalispell. Our car really did break down about 10 miles back. We've been walking for hours, not just." "1. I lied because I wasn't sure if we could trust you." Elena's voice carried the exhaustion of someone who'd been running on adrenaline for too long. "But then Carmen started having contractions, and I had to make a choice." A particularly strong gust of wind rattled the windows, and Elena instinctively moved away from them, positioning herself where she couldn't be seen from outside. The gesture spoke volumes about the fear these women had been living with. "You're safe here," Marcus said firmly. "Even if these men were crazy enough to be out in the storm, they'd never find this place. And if they did ... He didn't finish the sentence, but his expression made his meaning clear. 3 years of grief had left Marcus Callahan with very little patience for men who hurt women. Carmen cried out from the bedroom, the sound cutting through their conversation like a knife. Elena rushed to her sister's side, and Marcus followed, grabbing the medical supplies he'd assembled. When they entered the room, Carmen was gripping the bed frame, her face flushed with effort. "That one was stronger," she gasped as the contraction subsided. "And longer." Elena took her sister's hand, checking her pulse with practiced efficiency. "You have medical training," Marcus observed. "Army medic, 2 tours in Afghanistan," Elena confirmed without taking her eyes off Carmen. "It's why I knew we had to find shelter when her labor started progressing. I've delivered babies in worse conditions than this, but never my sister's baby." The revelation explained Elena's alertness, her tactical awareness, her ability to assess situations quickly. It also meant Marcus wasn't facing this situation alone. Elena had actual medical experience, even if it was military rather than obstetric. "What do you need me to do?" Marcus asked. "Keep boiling water, make sure we have plenty of clean towels, and help me time these contractions accurately. If they get to 5 minutes apart or less, we're looking at active labor." Elena was already shifting into professional mode, her fear replaced by focused competency. Over the next hour, they settled into a rhythm. Marcus maintained supplies and monitored conditions while Elena coached Carmen through increasingly intense contractions. The storm continued its assault outside, but inside the bedroom, time seemed to move differently. Measured not in minutes but in waves of pain and relief, Carmen proved to be remarkably strong, handling each contraction with determination that reminded Marcus of Sarah during her own battle with illness. There was something inspiring about watching people endure what seemed unbearable, finding reserves of strength they didn't know they possessed. "Elena," Carmen said during a brief respite between contractions, "I need you to promise me something. Anything. If something happens to me, if this goes wrong somehow, you'll make sure my baby is safe. That she has a good life away from David." Elena's composure cracked slightly. "Nothing's going to happen to you. We're both going to get through this, and we're both going to raise our daughters far away from those men." "Daughters?" Marcus asked. "We both found out we're having girls," Carmen explained. "Due dates are 3 days apart, both girls. Elena jokes that we planned it that way. The idea of twin cousins born so close together, growing up like sisters, struck Marcus as both beautiful and heartbreaking given the circumstances. These children would enter the world as refugees, their mothers fleeing violence before they even took their first breaths. As afternoon faded toward evening, Carmen's labor intensified dramatically. Her contractions were now coming every 4 minutes, lasting longer and requiring all her concentration to manage. Elena had checked her cervix and confirmed significant dilation. The baby was definitely coming, storm or no storm. "Marcus," Elena said during one of Carmen's brief rest periods, "I need to prepare you for something. Military deliveries aren't always textbook perfect. Sometimes there are complications, cord problems, positioning issues, bleeding. If something goes wrong, I might need you to make some difficult decisions." The weight of responsibility settled on Marcus's shoulders, like a physical burden. These women had sought shelter in his home, and now their lives and the lives of their unborn children might depend on his ability to act decisively in a crisis. It was a responsibility he'd never asked for but couldn't abandon. "I understand," he said simply. Carmen's next contraction was different, longer, more intense, accompanied by pressure that made her cry out despite her efforts to stay quiet. Elena checked her again and looked up with a mixture of excitement and concern. "This is it," she announced. "Carmen, your baby is crowning. On your next contraction, I need you to push." The next few minutes blurred together in a symphony of effort, encouragement, and anticipation. Carmen pushed with strength that seemed to come from somewhere beyond her physical body. While Elena coached and Marcus provided support, however, he could. Outside, the storm raged with undiminished fury, but inside the bedroom, life was asserting itself with unstoppable determination. "I can see her head," Elena exclaimed. "Carmen, she's beautiful. One more big push." Carmen gathered herself for one final effort, and with a cry that seemed to channel every emotion she'd experienced over the past months, fear, hope, love, determination, she brought her daughter into the world. The baby's first cry cut through the storms, howling like a beacon, strong and clear and undeniably alive. Elena caught her niece with practiced hands, quickly clearing her airway and stimulating her breathing. The infant responded immediately, her cries growing stronger as Elena wrapped her in a clean towel. "She's perfect," Elena said, tears streaming down her face as she placed the baby on Carmen's chest. "Carmen, she's absolutely perfect." Marcus stepped back, overwhelmed by the intensity of the moment. He'd witnessed the miracle of birth countless times with his cattle, but this was entirely different. This was a human life beginning its journey. A child who would grow up with dreams and fears and the capacity for love. Despite the circumstances that had brought her into existence, despite the storm raging outside and the dangers her family was fleeing, this little girl represented pure, Possibility. Carmen cradled her daughter, exhaustion and joy warring on her face. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "Welcome to the world. I'm your mama, and this is your Aunt Elena, and that's Mr. Callahan, who kept us safe." The baby's cries gradually subsided as she settled against her mother's warmth. Elena efficiently handled the medical aftermath of delivery, while Marcus disposed of soiled linens and replenished their supplies. The practiced teamwork felt natural, as if they'd been working together for years rather than hours. But even as they celebrated the successful birth, Marcus couldn't shake his awareness of the larger situation. Elena's labor was still ahead of them, and somewhere out in the world, dangerous men were looking for these women. The storm that had provided their protection would eventually pass, and then what? He couldn't keep them hidden forever, but he also couldn't imagine simply sending them back into harm's way. As if reading his thoughts, Elena looked up from where she was helping Carmen get comfortable. "Marcus, I know this complicates everything for you. Having us here, knowing what you know now about why we're running. If you want us to leave as soon as the storm passes—" "You're not going anywhere," Marcus interrupted firmly. "Not until it's safe, not until you have a real plan, and definitely not until you've both recovered from childbirth. This is your home for as long as you need it to be." The words surprised him as much as they seemed to surprise Elena. Marcus hadn't made a decision like that, a decision that opened his life to other people's needs and complications, since Sarah's death. For 3 years he'd existed in careful isolation, avoiding connections that might lead to loss or pain. But looking at Carmen holding her newborn daughter, at Elena preparing for her own impending labor, he realized that some decisions made themselves. Outside, the storm continued its relentless assault on the Montana landscape. But inside the old ranch house, warmth and light pushed back against the darkness. A baby girl slept peacefully in her mother's arms, while her aunt prepared to bring another new life into their complicated world. And Marcus Callahan, who had thought his capacity for caring had died with his wife, found himself standing guard over all of them, ready to face whatever challenges the coming hours might bring. The night was far from over, and Elena's labor had yet to begin in earnest. But they had successfully navigated their first crisis together, and in doing so, had formed the beginnings of something that looked remarkably like family, unconventional, temporary perhaps, but real in ways that mattered. Sarah would have understood, Marcus thought. She would have welcomed these women and their babies without hesitation, would have seen their arrival not as an imposition, but as a gift. Perhaps, for the first time since her death, Marcus was beginning to see it. That way too. Dawn was still hours away when Elena's contractions began in earnest. Unlike her sister's gradual progression, Elena's labor announced itself with sudden, sharp pains that doubled her over as she sat beside Carmen's bed, holding her newborn niece. The baby, whom Carmen had named Sophia after their grandmother, stirred at her aunt's sharp intake of breath but remained peacefully asleep. "That's it," Elena gasped, passing Sophia back to Carmen. "This little girl is ready to meet her cousin." Marcus had dozed fitfully in the hallway chair, jerking awake at every sound from the bedroom. The successful delivery of Carmen's baby had provided relief, but he understood they were only halfway through their immediate crisis. Elena's contractions were starting stronger and closer together than her sister's had, suggesting a faster, potentially more complicated labor. "How different is this likely to be?" Marcus asked as Elena breathed through another contraction. "Every birth is unique," Elena replied, her medical training keeping her analytical even as pain coursed through her body. "But second babies? Well, first babies for me, but I'm a twin, so genetically similar, often come faster. My contractions are already 3 minutes apart." Carmen shifted carefully in bed, cradling Sophia while watching her sister with concerned eyes. Elena's always been the impatient one. She probably told this baby to hurry up. Despite the tension, Elena managed a weak smile. "If I did," She's definitely listening. Marcus began the now familiar routine of preparing fresh supplies while Elena moved to the second bed he'd set up in the room. The storm outside had reached a new level of ferocity. He could hear tree branches snapping under the weight of ice and snow, and the old house groaned against wind gusts that had to be approaching 70 miles per hour. But the generator hummed steadily in the basement, keeping the lights on and the heat running. Elena's labor progressed with startling rapidity. Within 2 hours, her contractions were intense and frequent, requiring all her concentration to manage. Marcus found himself taking on more of the medical assistant role, while Elena focused on the increasingly demanding work of bringing her daughter into the world. "Something's different," Elena announced between contractions, her voice tight with concern. "The position feels wrong." "I think she might be breech." Marcus felt his stomach drop. Even with his limited knowledge of human birth, he understood that breech presentations could be dangerous, requiring medical interventions they simply didn't have available. "What does that mean for us?" "It means this is going to be more complicated than Carmen's delivery," Elena said, with characteristic directness. "I can try to guide her into the right position, but if that doesn't work, we're looking at a breech. Delivery in the middle of a Montana blizzard with no medical backup." Carmen listened to this exchange with a growing alarm while trying to keep Sophia calm. "Elena, maybe we should try to get help somehow. Radio, satellite phone, something." "The landlines are down, cell towers are probably out too, and my emergency radio is in the car we abandoned," Elena replied, pausing to breathe through another strong contraction. "We're on our own here." Marcus made a decision that surprised even him. "Then we handle it ourselves." "Elena, you've got the medical knowledge. I've got steady hands and I'm not squeamish. Between us we can do this." Elena studied his face, seeing something there that made her nod with determination. "Okay, but Marcus, I need you to understand, if something goes wrong, if we have to choose between me and the baby." "We're not choosing anything because nothing's going wrong," Marcus interrupted firmly. "Both of you are coming through this just fine." The next contraction hit Elena with such force that she cried out despite her efforts to stay quiet. When it subsided, she was breathing heavily, sweat beading on her forehead despite the cool air. "I need to check the baby's position. Marcus, I'm going to need your help." Working together, they confirmed Elena's suspicion. The baby was indeed breech, bottom first, instead of head down. In a hospital, this would mean an immediate cesarean section or skilled manipulation by an experienced obstetrician. In a storm-bound ranch house, it meant improvising with whatever knowledge and courage they could muster. "I'm going to try to turn her," Elena explained, her voice strained but professional. "It's called the external version, applying pressure to the abdomen to encourage the baby to flip. But it has to be done carefully, and it doesn't always work." Marcus positioned himself to assist while Carmen watched anxiously from her bed, Sophia sleeping peacefully in her arms, oblivious to the drama unfolding around her. Elena guided Marcus's hands to the correct positions on her belly, teaching him to feel for the baby's head and shoulders through her skin. "Now gentle pressure, rotating clockwise," Elena instructed. "Follow my lead. I can feel what she's doing better than you can see it." They worked together through several contractions, Elena directing while Marcus applied careful pressure. It was intimate work, requiring complete trust and communication between near strangers who'd been thrown together by circumstance. But gradually, incredibly, they felt the baby begin to respond. "She's moving," Elena exclaimed. "Keep going, same pressure, same direction." It took 20 minutes of patient, careful manipulation, but finally Elena felt the distinctive shift. That meant her daughter had turned head down into the proper position for birth. "That's it, she did it, we did it." The relief in the room was palpable, but Elena's labor continued to intensify. Now properly positioned, the baby seemed eager to make her entrance into the world. Elena's contractions were coming almost continuously, each one stronger than the last. "This is it," Elena announced, her voice mixing exhaustion with excitement. "She's coming now." Unlike Carmen's extended pushing phase, Elena's daughter seemed determined to arrive as quickly as possible. Within minutes, Marcus could see the baby's head crowning, and Elena was pushing with focused intensity that spoke of her military training, direct, efficient, and absolutely determined to succeed. "Almost there," Marcus encouraged, amazed at how natural this felt despite his complete lack of experience. "I can see her face." With one final tremendous effort, Elena brought her daughter into the world. The baby emerged pink and protesting, her cries immediately filling the room with sound that seemed to push back against the storm's fury outside. "She's beautiful," Marcus said, carefully lifting the baby and checking her breathing before placing her on Elena's chest. "She's perfect." Elena collapsed back against the pillows, tears streaming down her face as she held her daughter for the first time. "Hello, little warrior," she whispered. "I'm your mama. You just survived your first battle." Carmen leaned over as much as she could manage, Sophia still cradled in one arm, while she reached out to touch her new niece. "Look, Sophia," she said softly, "meet your cousin Isabella. You two are going to be best friends." Isabella, Elena had chosen the name months ago, after another of their grandmothers settled against her mother's chest with the satisfied air of someone who'd accomplished exactly what she'd set out to do. Her cries gradually subsided as she found her mother's warmth and heartbeat. Marcus handled the medical aftermath of Elena's delivery with growing confidence, having learned from Carmen's birth just hours earlier. Elena coached him through the necessary procedures, her professional knowledge ensuring everything was done safely and thoroughly. As the immediate crisis passed and both babies settled into peaceful sleep with their mothers, Marcus found himself sitting in the hallway outside the bedroom, overwhelmed by what had just transpired. In the space of one night, his quiet, solitary existence had been transformed into something he couldn't have imagined. 2 babies had been born in his house. 2 women had trusted him with their lives and the lives of their children, and he had risen to meet challenges he'd never dreamed of facing. But even as he savored the miracle of what they'd accomplished, Marcus's practical side was already working on the larger problems ahead. Elena and Carmen were safe for now, but they were still fugitives from dangerous men who wouldn't give up their pursuit easily. The storm would eventually pass, communications would be restored, and decisions would have to be made about what came next. Elena appeared in the doorway, moving carefully but under her own power. "I wanted to thank you," she said quietly, settling into the chair beside him. "What you did tonight, what you've done for us, goes beyond simple kindness. You saved our lives." "You did most of the work," Marcus replied. "I just helped where I could." "That's not true, and you know it. You opened your home to strangers, you didn't panic when things got complicated, and you made us feel safe when we hadn't felt safe in months." Elena paused, studying his face in the dim hallway. "Light, Carmen and I have been running for so long, we'd almost forgotten what it felt like to have someone we could depend on." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, processing emotions he'd kept buried for 3 years. "My wife Sarah would have done exactly what I did, probably better. She always said our home was meant to shelter people who needed it." "Tell me about her," Elena said gently. So Marcus did. For the first time since Sarah's funeral, he found himself talking about his wife, not about her illness or death, but about who she'd been when she was alive. He told Elena about Sarah's laugh, about her terrible cooking that he'd pretended to enjoy, about the way she'd insisted on naming all their cattle, even though they were livestock, not pets. He talked about her dreams for the ranch, her plans for the children they'd never been able to have, her absolute certainty that everything happened for a reason. "She sounds wonderful," Elena said when he finished. "And she sounds like someone who would be very proud of what you did tonight." Before Marcus could respond, they heard Carmen calling softly from the bedroom. Both babies were awake and hungry, ready for their first real feeding. Elena rose carefully, and Marcus followed, returning to the room that had become the center of their transformed world. Carmen was attempting to nurse Sophia while Isabella fussed in her makeshift bassinet. A dresser drawer lined with soft blankets. Elena picked up her daughter, settling into the room's second chair to begin feeding her. The sight of both women nursing their babies in the warm lamplight, while snow continued to pile against the windows, struck Marcus as something from a Renaissance painting, Madonna and Child, twice over in the shelter of his Montana ranch house. "What happens now?" Carmen asked after both babies had settled into feeding. "I mean, after the storm passes. We can't stay hidden here forever, and David won't stop looking for us." Elena shifted Isabella to her other arm, her expression growing serious. "We need to get to that women's shelter in Kalispell, assuming it's still available. From there, we can work with legal advocates to establish new identities, file restraining orders, maybe relocate somewhere David and his partner can't find us." Marcus listened to their planning with growing reluctance to see them leave. Over the course of one night, these women and their babies had brought his house back to life in ways he hadn't realized he'd been missing. The sound of voices, the purposeful activity, even the stress and drama, it all felt more real than the careful, quiet existence he'd maintained since Sarah's death. But more than that, he recognized something in Elena and Carmen that resonated with his own experience of loss and survival. They were fighters, people who'd endured terrible circumstances and emerged with their capacity for love and hope intact. Their babies represented not just new life, but new possibilities for healing and growth. "What if," Marcus said slowly, the words forming as he spoke them, "what if you didn't have to leave right away? What if you stayed here while you figured out your next steps? This ranch is isolated, defensible, and off the grid enough that it would be hard for anyone to find you. You'd have time to recover, to plan properly, to make decisions from a position of safety instead of desperation." Elena and Carmen exchanged a look that spoke volumes about their exhaustion, their fears, and their desperate need for exactly what Marcus was offering: time and safety to figure out their future. "Marcus," Elena said carefully, "that's incredibly generous, but we couldn't impose on you like that. You've already done so much, and having us here long-term would change your entire life." "Maybe it's time for my life to change," Marcus replied, surprising himself with the honesty of the statement. "Maybe that's why you ended up here tonight." Outside, the storm continued its assault on the Montana landscape, but inside the ranch house, 3 adults and 2 babies were beginning to form the nucleus of something that looked remarkably like family. It was complicated, unconventional, and born of crisis rather than choice. But as Marcus watched Elena and Carmen with their daughters, as he felt the old house warming with new purpose, he realized that sometimes the most important decisions were made themselves. Sarah had always believed in the power of second chances. Perhaps it was time for Marcus to believe in them too. The storm finally broke on the 3rd day, leaving behind a landscape transformed into a crystalline wonderland that stretched endlessly toward the mountains. Marcus stood at the kitchen window, coffee mug in hand, watching sunrise paint the snow-covered pastures in shades of gold and pink. The silence after 3 days of howling wind felt almost oppressive, but it was broken by the soft sounds of life from upstairs, babies stirring, quiet voices, the creaking of floorboards under careful footsteps. He'd moved Elena and Carmen to the master bedroom on Sarah's insistence, or at least what he imagined Sarah's insistence would have been. The downstairs guest room had served its purpose during the emergency, but new mothers needed space, comfort, and privacy to establish routines with their infants. Marcus had taken the small bedroom down the hall, Sarah's old sewing room, sleeping better in those 3 nights than he had in months. The phone line crackled back to life that morning, startling him with its sudden ring. Tommy Brennan's voice came through scratchy but relieved. "Marcus, Jesus man, I've been worried sick. Are you okay out there? That storm was a monster." "I'm fine, Tommy. Better than fine, actually. But I need to ask you to stay away for a few more days. I've got some guests who need privacy right now." There was a pause on the other end. Tommy had worked the ranch long enough to know that Marcus didn't have guests, didn't want guests, and certainly didn't prioritize anyone's privacy over ranch work. "Everything all right?" "You sound different." "Everything's complicated," Marcus admitted. "But good complicated, if that makes sense. Can you handle the south pasture repairs we discussed? And maybe pick up some supplies in town? I'll make you a list." "Sure thing, boss. But Marcus, if you need anything at all, you call me." "Okay." After hanging up, Marcus found himself staring at a notepad, trying to figure out how to create a shopping list for 2 women and 2 newborns when he'd been living alone for 3 years. Diapers, formula, baby clothes, nursing supplies. The practical requirements of infant care were foreign territory for someone whose recent shopping had consisted mainly of cattle feed and frozen dinners. Elena appeared in the kitchen doorway, moving more easily than she had the day before, but still careful with her movements. She'd borrowed one of Sarah's robes, a soft blue terry cloth that had always been too big for his petite wife, but fit Elena perfectly. The sight should have been jarring, but instead it felt natural, as if the house was remembering how to accommodate the needs of women. "Coffee smells amazing," she said, accepting the mug he offered. "Carmen's feeding both girls right now. They seem to be on synchronized schedules, which is either a blessing or means they're plotting something." Marcus smiled at the image. "How are you feeling? Really feeling, not the polite answer." Elena considered the question, wrapping her hands around the warm mug. "Physically, I'm recovering faster than I expected. Emotionally." She paused, looking out at the snow-covered landscape. "For the first time since this whole nightmare started, I feel like I can breathe, like maybe we actually made it to safety." "You did. You have." Marcus pulled out the notepad he'd been staring at. "I was trying to figure out what supplies you and Carmen need. I'm afraid my shopping list skills are pretty limited when it comes to babies." Elena looked at the mostly blank page and laughed, the first genuine laugh he'd heard from her. "Oh, Marcus, we need everything, literally everything. When we left, we grabbed what we could carry and ran. We don't have cribs, car seats, proper clothes for the girls, barely any clothes for ourselves." The magnitude of their situation hit him fully for the first time. These women had fled their lives so completely that they possessed nothing but the clothes they'd worn and the strength to survive. Everything else, homes, possessions, support networks, even their identities, had been abandoned in the name of safety. "Make me a complete list," Marcus said. "Everything you can think of. Tommy can pick it up in town today." "Marcus, we can't let you spend your money on us like that. We'll find a way to reimburse you, but it might take time, and it's going to be expensive. Elena, Marcus's voice was gentle but firm. 3 days ago, you trusted me with the most precious things in your life, your safety and your sister's safety and your babies' lives. Don't insult that trust now by worrying about money." Elena studied his face, seeing something there that made her nod. "Okay, but we're keeping track of everything. Someday, when we're back on our feet, we're paying you back." Over the next hour, they compiled a comprehensive list of necessities. Elena's military background showed in her systematic approach. She categorized items by priority, estimated quantities, and even suggested specific brands based on quality and value. It was clear she'd thought about these purchases during the months of running, planning for a day when they might have the safety and resources to properly care for their children. Carmen joined them as they finished the list, carrying both babies, with the practiced ease of someone who'd adapted quickly to motherhood. Sophia was awake and alert, her dark eyes taking in the world with serious curiosity, while Isabella dozed peacefully against her aunt's shoulder. "Did I hear something about a shopping expedition?" Carmen asked, settling carefully into a kitchen chair, "because if Tommy's going to town, I have a desperate request for real food. Hospital crackers and whatever Marcus had in his pantry have been lifesavers, but I'm dreaming of fresh fruit and vegetables." Marcus realized he'd been feeding his guests from his bachelor stockpile of canned goods and frozen meals, adequate for survival but hardly nutritious for nursing mothers. Add groceries to the list, real groceries. "What do you like to cook?" The question sparked an unexpected conversation about food, family recipes, and the small pleasures that made a house feel like home. Carmen talked about their grandmothers. Tamales, made every Christmas with assembly line efficiency and enough love to feed half of San Antonio. Elena described the elaborate Sunday dinners she'd prepared for friends during her time at Fort Bragg, how cooking had become her way of creating family among soldiers far from home. As they talked, Marcus found himself remembering Sarah's efforts. In the kitchen, well-intentioned disasters that had become legendary between them. She'd burned water, literally trying to boil eggs. Her idea of seasoning was to dump entire containers of spices into unsuspecting dishes. But she'd approached each culinary failure with such enthusiasm that he'd never had the heart to take over cooking duties completely. "Sarah tried to make tamales once," he found himself saying. "She'd met your grandmother at the farmer's market in town and convinced her to share the recipe. Sarah spent 2 days preparing, laid out all the ingredients like a surgical procedure, followed every instruction exactly. The final product looked perfect, until you bit into them and discovered she'd used cinnamon instead of chili powder." Elena and Carmen looked at him with surprise. This was the first time he'd shared a humorous memory of Sarah, the first time he'd talked about her without the weight of grief shadowing every word. "Did you eat them anyway?" Carmen asked. "Every single one." Told her they were the most interesting tamales I'd ever had, which was technically true. Marcus smiled at the memory. "She knew they were terrible, but she also knew I was trying to be supportive. We ended up ordering pizza and laughing until our sides hurt." The conversation continued as they worked through the morning routine of caring for 2 infants in a house that had never hosted babies before. Marcus proved surprisingly adaptable, learning to hold Sophia while Elena changed Isabella, mastering the art of bottle warming, even attempting his first diaper change with Carmen's patient coaching. "You're a natural at this," Elena observed, watching him successfully calm a fussy Isabella with gentle rocking motions. "Did you and Sarah want children?" The question hit deeper than Marcus expected, touching on dreams that had been buried with his wife. "We tried for years. Fertility treatments, specialists, the whole medical journey. Sarah was convinced it would happen eventually. She had this unshakable faith that everything worked out the way it was supposed to. I was more realistic, or maybe just more pessimistic." He looked down at Isabella, who had settled peacefully in his arms, her tiny fist wrapped around his finger with surprising strength. "After she got sick, we stopped trying. Focused on other things, other ways to build the life we wanted. Sarah talked about fostering, maybe adoption, but then the cancer progressed so fast. Will quotes Carmen reached over and touched his arm gently. "She would love seeing you with the girls. Anyone can tell you were meant to be a father." The observation hung in the air, loaded with implications none of them were quite ready to address directly. But Marcus felt the truth of it settling into his bones, holding these babies, caring for their mothers, providing safety and shelter. And comfort felt more natural than anything he'd done since Sarah's death. Tommy arrived that afternoon with a truck full of supplies that transformed the ranch house once again. Cribs were assembled in the master bedroom, baby clothes were sorted and washed, and the kitchen was stocked with enough food to feed a small army. Elena and Carmen worked with quiet efficiency, creating order from chaos, establishing routines that would let them care for their daughters properly. But the abundance of supplies also highlighted the temporary nature of their situation. These women were refugees, and refugees eventually had to make permanent plans. The question none of them had addressed directly was becoming more pressing with each passing day. What happened next? Elena brought it up that evening as they sat in the living room, both babies fed and sleeping peacefully in their new cribs upstairs. Carmen was resting, still recovering from childbirth, and Marcus was learning to appreciate this simple pleasure of adult conversation in a house that had been silent for too long. "I called the women's shelter in Kalispell while you were helping Tommy unload," Elena said without preamble. "They have space for us, but not until next week. And Marcus, I need to be honest about something. I'm not sure it's the right choice anymore." Marcus set down his coffee mug, giving her his full attention. "Why not?" "Because shelters are temporary solutions. Carmen and I would be there for maybe 60 days. Then we'd be on our own again. Two single mothers with newborns, no jobs, no permanent addresses, no way to really disappear from David and his partner." Elena's military training showed in her analytical approach to the problem. "We'd be vulnerable again, just in a different location. What's the alternative?" Elena was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire Marcus had built to ward off the evening chill. "I keep thinking about what you said, about staying here while we figure out our next steps. I know it was probably just kindness, something you said to make us feel better. But Marcus, what if it wasn't just temporary? What if we found a way to make this work long term?" The question hung between them, loaded with possibilities that terrified and attracted Marcus in equal measure. Elena was talking about fundamentally changing his life, about transforming his solitary existence into something complicated and unpredictable and absolutely contrary to everything he'd built since Sarah's death. But as he looked around the living room, Sarah's quilts draped over chairs where Elena and Carmen had been sitting, baby blankets scattered on the coffee table, the sound of infant breathing drifting down from upstairs, Marcus realized his life had already been transformed. The question wasn't whether change was coming, but whether he was brave enough to embrace it. "Tell me what you're thinking," he said carefully. Elena leaned forward, her dark eyes reflecting the firelight. "I'm thinking about two women who know how to work hard, who understand what it means to fight for what matters. I'm thinking about a ranch that's too big for one person to manage alone, and a man who's been carrying grief that's too heavy for anyone to bear in isolation. I'm thinking about two little girls who deserve to grow up somewhere safe and beautiful, with people who love them." She paused, then continued with characteristic directness. "I'm thinking about building something real here, Marcus. Not just hiding from our past, but creating a future worth having. For all of us." Outside, night was falling across the Montana landscape, stars appearing in a sky clearer than any city dweller would ever see. Inside the ranch house, 3 adults and 2 babies were poised on the edge of a decision that would change everything. Marcus Callahan, who had thought his story was ending, was being offered the chance to help write a new beginning, not just for himself, but for a family that hadn't existed a week ago, but felt more real than anything he'd experienced in years. Sarah would have called it destiny. Marcus was beginning to think she might have been right. Marcus spent that night walking the property, needing the cold air and physical movement to process what Elena had proposed. The moonlight on fresh snow created a landscape so bright he barely needed the flashlight he carried, and his footsteps crunched with the satisfying sound of someone who belonged in this environment. But tonight, the familiar rhythms of ranch inspection couldn't quiet the thoughts racing through his mind. Elena's proposal wasn't just about providing shelter. It was about creating something entirely new. A partnership, a family, a future he hadn't dared imagine since Sarah's death. But it also meant opening himself to loss again, to caring about people who might disappear from his life as suddenly as they'd appeared in it. By the time he returned to the house, dawn was painting the eastern mountains in shades of rose and gold. He found Elena in the kitchen, Isabella cradled against her shoulder while she attempted to make coffee one-handed, a skill she was clearly still mastering. "Couldn't sleep either?" she asked, looking up from her struggle with the coffee maker. "Thinking," Marcus replied, taking Isabella so Elena could use both hands. The baby settled against his chest with the easy trust of someone who'd already learned to associate his presence with safety and warmth. "About what you said last night." Elena finished preparing the coffee, then turned to face him directly. "And what conclusion did you reach?" Marcus had rehearsed various responses during his long walk, but looking at Elena's face, tired but determined, hopeful but prepared for disappointment, he found himself abandoning prepared speeches for her. Simple honesty. "I think Sarah would have loved you both. She would have insisted we make this work, would have started planning improvements to the house before I could finish explaining the situation." "But what do you think, Marcus? Not what Sarah would have thought. What do you want?" It was a fair question, and one Marcus had been avoiding even in his own thoughts. What did he want? For 3 years, he'd defined himself by what he'd lost rather than what he might gain. But holding Isabella, knowing Carmen and Sofia were sleeping peacefully upstairs, feeling the house alive with purpose again, the answer was clearer than he'd expected. "I want you to stay," he said simply. "Not because I'm trying to replace what I lost, but because what we're building together feels right, important, worth fighting for." Elena's smile transformed her face, erasing years of worry and fear. "Really? Because once we commit to this, Marcus, there's no going back to your quiet, orderly life. We're talking about raising 2 babies, probably dealing with legal challenges, definitely changing everything about how this ranch operates." "I know." Marcus shifted Isabella to his other arm, marveling at how natural the motion had become. "But I also know that I've felt more alive in the past week than I have since Sarah died. You and Carmen and the girls, you've reminded me what I've been missing." Their conversation was interrupted by Carmen's appearance in the kitchen, moving carefully, but with growing strength. Sofia was awake and alert in her arms, those serious dark eyes taking in the morning light streaming through the windows. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything important," Carmen said, though her smile suggested she'd overheard enough to understand the significance of the moment. "Actually," Elena said, "Marcus just agreed to let us stay permanently, if you're okay with that arrangement." Carmen looked between them, then down at Sofia. "You mean stay here on the ranch? Raise the girls here?" "That's what we're discussing." Marcus confirmed. "It wouldn't be a charity arrangement. Elena and I were talking about making this a real partnership. You both contribute to the ranch operation, help build something sustainable for all of us." Carmen settled into a kitchen chair, clearly processing the implications. "David will never stop looking for me, you know. He'll hire private investigators, maybe even try to use legal channels to get custody of Sofia. Having us here could bring serious trouble to your door." Marcus had considered this during his nighttime walk, weighing the potential dangers against the certainties of letting them go. "Carmen, men like your ex-husband rely on their victims being isolated and defenseless. Here, you wouldn't be either. This ranch is defensible, I'm not easily intimidated. And Elena's military background means we'd have tactical advantages most people don't." Elena nodded, her expression growing serious. "Plus, I still have contacts from my service days. People who specialize in helping women disappear permanently when their lives are threatened. We could establish new identities, create paper trails that lead nowhere, make it legally impossible for David to find you." The conversation that followed was unlike anything Marcus had ever participated in. They discussed security measures, legal strategies, financial arrangements, and practical considerations with the methodical thoroughness of people planning a military operation. Elena's expertise was invaluable, But Marcus found his own contributions appreciated: knowledge of local law enforcement, understanding of rural legal systems, and practical insights about maintaining privacy in sparsely populated areas. By mid-morning, they'd outlined a plan that was ambitious, complex, and possibly their best hope for creating lasting safety. Elena would use her military contacts to arrange new documentation for herself and Carmen. Marcus would consult with a lawyer in Billings, who specialized in domestic violence cases, someone Tommy had recommended years ago when a neighbor faced similar threats. Carmen would focus on recovering from childbirth while learning ranch operations that could provide both income and security. "There's one more thing we need to discuss," Elena said as they finished breakfast. "Financial arrangements. Marcus, you're offering us everything: shelter, safety, partnership in your ranch. What do you get out of this besides the pleasure of our company?" Marcus had been thinking about this too. The ranch had been profitable when he and Sarah ran it together, but managing it alone had reduced both productivity and his own quality of life. 2 additional adults, especially ones with Elena's organizational skills and Carmen's apparent willingness to learn, could transform the operation. "I get partners," he said. "People who care about making this place succeed, who'll help me expand operations I've had to scale back since Sarah died. The ranch could support all of us comfortably if we work it right. Cattle, maybe some crop. Rotation, possibly even agritourism if we wanted to get ambitious." Elena leaned forward, interested. "Agritourism? City people pay good money to experience ranch life, help with cattle drives, learn to ride horses, eat meals cooked over open fires. Sarah always wanted to try it, but we never had the staffing to make it work, with more people, more hands." Carmen looked up from feeding Sophia. "I worked in hospitality before I met David, guest relations, event planning. I know how to make people feel welcome, how to create experiences they'll remember and recommend to others." The pieces were falling into place with the precision that made Marcus wonder if Elena was right about destiny. Each of them brought skills and experience that complemented the others, creating possibilities none of them could achieve alone. More than that, they were building something based on mutual benefit rather than charity, a partnership where everyone contributed and everyone gained. The afternoon brought their first real test of commitment. Tommy Brennan arrived for his regularly scheduled ranch work, and Marcus realized he'd have to explain the presence of 2 women and 2 babies without revealing details that could compromise their safety. Tommy knocked on the kitchen door as he had hundreds of times before, but stopped short when Elena answered instead of Marcus. His weathered face registered surprise, confusion, and poorly concealed curiosity as he took in the sight of an unfamiliar woman holding an infant. "Tommy," Marcus said, appearing behind Elena, "I'd like you to meet Elena Rodriguez and her sister, Carmen. They're going to be staying at the ranch for a while." Tommy's eyes moved between Elena, Carmen, and the babies, clearly trying to piece together a story that made sense. Marcus had worked with him long enough to know Tommy was discreet, but also that he was protective of the ranch and suspicious of changes that might affect its operation. "Ladies," Tommy said politely, touching the brim of his hat. Marcus didn't mention he was expecting visitors. "It was unexpected for all of us," Elena replied smoothly. "But we're hoping to make ourselves useful while we're here." "I understand. You help manage the cattle operation?" Something in Elena's directness and obvious competence seemed to reassure Tommy. "Yes, ma'am. Been working this ranch for 12 years now. Always happy to teach someone who wants to learn." Over the next hour, Tommy found himself drawn into conversations about ranch management, seasonal operations, and improvement projects that had been deferred due to limited manpower. Elena asked intelligent questions that demonstrated she understood the complexity of agricultural operations, while Carmen contributed insights about business management and customer service that impressed the experienced ranch hand. By the time Tommy left that evening, His initial suspicion had been replaced by cautious optimism. "Marcus," he said privately as they walked toward his truck, "I don't know what's really going on here, but those women seem solid, and this ranch could use some fresh energy. They're staying, Tommy, permanently if things work out the way we're planning." Tommy studied Marcus's face in the gathering twilight. "You seem different, more like yourself, if that makes sense." Sarah would be pleased. The comment stayed with Marcus as he returned to the house, where Alina and Carmen were establishing evening routines with their daughters. Sarah would indeed be pleased, he realized. Not because he was replacing her, but because he was finally allowing life to move forward instead of remaining frozen in grief. That evening, as they sat in the living room with both babies settled for the night, Elena brought up a subject they'd been avoiding. "Marcus, we need to talk about sleeping arrangements. Long term, I mean. We can't keep occupying your bedroom indefinitely." Marcus had been thinking about this too. The master bedroom was the largest, most comfortable room in the house, but it was also filled with memories of his life with Sarah. Surprisingly, those memories no longer felt like barriers to sharing the space. "Actually," he said, "I think you and Carmen should keep the master bedroom. It's got the most space for the cribs, and it's closest to the bathroom. I'm comfortable in the smaller room." Carmen looked up from where she was rocking Sophia. "Marcus, that's your room." "Sarah's room. We can't take that from you." "You're not taking anything," Marcus replied gently. "You're using it for what it was. Always meant for raising children, creating family, building the future Sarah and I dreamed about. She would want it used for that purpose." Elena studied his face carefully. "Are you sure? Because once we set up the nursery properly, install all the baby furniture, it'll be hard to change back." "I'm sure," Marcus said, and meant it. The master bedroom had been a shrine to his grief for too long. It was time for it to serve life instead of memory. They spent the rest of the evening planning practical changes, converting the small dining room into a proper nursery, rearranging furniture to accommodate their expanded household, discussing improvements that would make the house more functional for their unconventional family. As Alina and Carmen headed upstairs with their daughters, Marcus remained in the living room, staring into the dying fire. A week ago, he'd been a widower, living alone on an isolated ranch, going through the motions of life without really participating in it. Tonight, he was part of a family unit that hadn't existed before, but felt more real than anything he'd experienced since Sarah's death. The transformation wasn't complete. There were still legal challenges to navigate, security concerns to address, and the complex work of learning to live together harmoniously. But for the first time in 3 years, Marcus Callahan was looking forward to tomorrow instead of simply enduring it. Outside, the Montana night settled over the ranch with its familiar sounds: wind through the cottonwoods, distant cattle lowing, the soft creak of settling timber. But inside the old house, new sounds had joined the nighttime symphony: the soft breathing of sleeping babies, the quiet voices of women settling into a home that had welcomed them completely. Sarah would indeed be pleased, Marcus thought as he finally headed upstairs. She'd always believed that homes were meant to be filled with love, laughter, and the beautiful chaos of family life. It had taken 3 years and a Montana blizzard, but her dream was finally coming true. 3 weeks later, Marcus stood in the renovated dining room that had become Sophia and Isabella's nursery, watching Carmen teach her daughter to recognize different animal sounds from a picture book. The transformation of the house was remarkable. What had once been formal, rarely used space now bustled with the organized chaos of infant care. 2 cribs occupied the sunny corner. A changing station dominated one wall, and comfortable chairs, positioned near the windows, provided perfect spots for feeding and rocking. But the changes went deeper than furniture arrangement. The entire rhythm of the ranch had shifted to accommodate their unconventional family. Morning chores now included bottle preparation alongside cattle feeding. Evening routines involved lullabies as well as equipment maintenance. The sounds of babies crying, women laughing, and life being lived had replaced 3 years of careful silence. Elena entered carrying Isabella and a stack of legal documents that had arrived that morning. Her contacts had proven remarkably efficient: new birth certificates, social security numbers, and identification documents that would allow both sisters to disappear completely from their previous lives while establishing legitimate new ones. Everything looks perfect, Elena announced, spreading the papers across the changing table. As of today, Carmen Rodriguez is officially Carmen Stewart, and I'm Elena Martinez. Isabella and Sofia have clean documentation that traces back to hospital records that can't be questioned. Carmen looked up from the picture book, relief evident in her expression. What about David? If he tries to find us using the old names, he'll hit dead ends everywhere. The identities we abandoned never existed in Montana, and the new ones have complete backstories that place us here for the past 2 years. We're not hiding anymore. We're officially different people. Marcus appreciated the thoroughness of Elena's planning, but he also understood the emotional weight of what she was describing. These women had literally erased themselves to escape their past, sacrificing every connection to their former lives for the sake of safety. It was a kind of death and rebirth that most people couldn't imagine enduring. How does it feel? He asked Elena. Being someone else officially. Elena considered the question while settling into the rocking chair with Isabella. Liberating. Mostly, but also strange. Elena Rodriguez was a soldier, a sister, a woman shaped by specific experiences and relationships. Elena Martinez is whoever I choose to be. It's terrifying and exciting at the same time. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of 2 vehicles in the ranch driveway. Tommy's familiar pickup truck followed by a sleek black sedan that immediately put everyone on alert. Elena moved instinctively toward the window while Marcus stepped protectively closer to Carmen and Sofia. You expecting anyone? Elena asked, her military training evident in the way she assessed potential threats. No, Marcus replied grimly. Tommy's not due until tomorrow, and I don't recognize the other car. Through the window, they watched Tommy exit his truck and approach the sedan as a man in expensive suit emerged from the driver's side. Even from a distance, Marcus could see the tension in Tommy's posture, the way he positioned himself between the stranger and the house. Elena's expression had gone cold and professional. Carmen, take both girls upstairs. Now, use the back stairs. And stay away from windows. Carmen didn't argue, gathering Sofia while Elena quickly handed over Isabella. The sight of both women moving with practiced efficiency, implementing security protocols they'd obviously discussed, drove home the reality that danger was never far from their new life. Marcus watched the 2 men talking in his driveway, noting the stranger's aggressive gestures and Tommy's defensive stance. After several minutes, Tommy headed toward the house while the suited man returned to his car but didn't leave. Marcus, Tommy called through the kitchen door. We need to talk. This gentleman says he's looking for 2 women and some babies. Has questions about whether you might have seen them. Elena materialized beside Marcus, having moved through the house with military stealth. Let me handle this, she said quietly. I need to see who we're dealing with. The man who entered the kitchen behind Tommy was everything Marcus had expected from Carmen's descriptions of David's world: expensively dressed, artificially friendly, with eyes that missed nothing. He introduced himself as Detective Ray Morrison from the Denver Police Department, but something about his manner suggested he wasn't exactly operating in an official capacity. Mr. Callahan, Morrison said, extending a business card. I'm investigating the disappearance of 2 women, Elena Rodriguez and Carmen Rodriguez. They were last seen in this area about 3 weeks ago, traveling with newborn infants. Have you had any contact with individuals matching that description? Elena stepped forward before Marcus could respond, her posture confident but not aggressive. "I'm sorry, Detective Morrison, but we haven't seen anyone matching that description. This ranch is pretty isolated. We don't get many visitors, especially not women traveling with babies in winter weather." Morrison's gaze fixed on Elena with uncomfortable intensity. "And you are?" "Elena Martinez. I work here on the ranch." Elena's voice carried no trace of nervousness, no hint that she was the person he was looking for. Her new identity wasn't just legal documentation. It was a complete transformation of presence and personality. "Interesting," Morrison said, pulling out a photograph. "Because Elena Rodriguez looked remarkably similar to you. Same height, same build, same general coloring." Elena examined the photograph with apparent curiosity. "I can see some resemblance, I suppose. But you know what they say about everyone having a double somewhere. Is there a specific reason you're looking for these women? Are they suspects in some crime?" Morrison's smile didn't reach his eyes. "They're witnesses in an ongoing investigation. Important witnesses whose testimony could help resolve some serious charges. Their families are very concerned about their welfare." The lies rolled off Morrison's tongue with practiced ease, but Marcus could see Elena cataloging every detail of his presentation, the way he avoided direct questions about his authority, the vagueness of his supposed investigation, the subtle threats embedded in his reasonable tone. "Well," Elena said pleasantly, "I wish we could help, but as I said, we haven't seen anyone like that. If we do encounter women matching that description, should we contact you directly or go through official channels?" Morrison handed Elena his card, but Marcus noticed it listed only a phone number and email address, no official police department information. "You can reach me directly, day or night. And I should mention, there's a substantial reward for information leading to locating these women. Enough to make it worth someone's while to remember details they might have initially overlooked." Elena pocketed the card without looking at it. "We'll certainly keep that in mind. Tommy, didn't you mention you've been covering more territory during your supply runs? Maybe you've seen something on the back roads?" Tommy, who had remained silent during the exchange, shook his head slowly. "Nothing like that, Elena. Been pretty quiet out here all winter. Haven't seen any unfamiliar vehicles or people, especially not women with babies." Morrison looked between the three of them, clearly frustrated by their lack of cooperation, but unable to push harder without revealing his lack of official authority. "Well, if anything comes to mind, please don't hesitate to call. These women may be in danger, and their families just want them home safely." After Morrison left, the three of them remained silent until his car disappeared down the ranch road. Only then did Elena allow her professional mask to slip, revealing the fear and anger underneath. "That wasn't a detective," she said flatly. "Real cops don't operate alone on missing person cases. They don't offer rewards for witness information. And they don't refuse to provide official contact information. That was a private investigator, probably hired by David." Tommy looked confused and concerned. "Elena, I don't understand what's going on here, but that man felt wrong to me. Dangerous." "Wrong. Are you and Carmen in some kind of trouble?" Elena and Marcus exchanged glances, and Marcus made a decision that would have seemed impossible a month ago. "Tommy, Elena, and Carmen are running from abusive ex-partners who've been trying to track them down. They came here during that storm 3 weeks ago, and we've decided they're staying permanently. What you just witnessed was probably our first real test of whether their new identities will hold up." Tommy absorbed this information with the steady calm of someone who'd lived through enough crises to recognize real danger. "Okay, what do you need from me?" The simple question, asked without judgment or hesitation, reminded Marcus why he'd trusted Tommy with ranch operations for so many years. Elena looked equally moved by the immediate offer of support. "Discretion mostly," Elena replied. "If anyone else comes asking questions, we've never heard of Elena Rodriguez or Carmen Rodriguez. We're Elena Martinez and Carmen Stewart, and we've been working at this ranch for 2 years. Can you remember that?" "Consider it done," Tommy said firmly. "But Elena, if men like that start showing up regularly, we need to think about security measures. This ranch may be isolated, but it's not a fortress." The conversation that followed was unlike any Marcus had ever participated in, but it was exactly the kind of planning Elena's military experience had prepared her for. They discussed perimeter alarms, communication protocols, and defensive positions. Tommy revealed knowledge of security systems gained during his military service in Iraq, while Marcus contributed intimate familiarity with every approach to the ranch property. By evening, they developed a comprehensive security plan that would make the ranch genuinely defensible without appearing overtly militarized. Motion sensors along the access road, upgraded locks on all buildings, secure communication equipment, and predetermined responses to various threats. It was sobering to realize they needed such precautions, but also reassuring to know they weren't. Facing potential dangers unprepared, Carmen emerged from upstairs once Morrison was long gone, both babies fed and settled for the night. She listened to their description of the encounter with growing pallor, but also with a kind of grim satisfaction. "So David found us, or at least found our trail," she said. "I was wondering how long it would take." "Actually," Elena corrected, "David found Elena Rodriguez and Carmen Rodriguez. As far as that investigator is concerned, those women have vanished completely. Elena Martinez and Carmen Stewart have alibis, documentation, and witnesses who'll swear we've been here for years." Carmen smiled for the first time since hearing about Morrison's visit. "You mean it actually worked?" The new identities held up under direct questioning. "They held up perfectly," Marcus confirmed. "Even I was convinced Elena was telling the truth, and I know the real story." The success of their first security test was encouraging, but it also highlighted how much their lives had changed from the simple arrangement Marcus had originally envisioned. They weren't just two women seeking temporary shelter anymore. They were partners in an ongoing operation that required constant vigilance and careful planning. That night, as they established the new security protocols Elena had designed, Marcus found himself thinking about the journey that had brought them to this point. A month ago, he'd been a grief-stricken widower going through the motions of life. Tonight, he was part of a complex family unit that included military-style security planning, false identities, and the constant possibility of danger. It should have been overwhelming, should have made him question the wisdom of allowing his life to become so complicated. Instead, Marcus felt more engaged and purposeful than he had since Sarah's death. Elena and Carmen weren't just refugees he was protecting. They were partners who brought skills, knowledge, and determination that made them unconventional. Family stronger than any of them could be alone. Elena found him checking the new motion sensors Tommy had installed along the access road, their infrared beams invisible but reassuring in the darkness. "Having second thoughts?" she asked, joining him on the porch. "Actually, no," Marcus replied honestly. "I'm thinking about how different this is from anything Sarah and I ever planned, but also how much she would have approved. She always said, our home should be a sanctuary for people who needed one." Elena was quiet for a moment, looking out over the moonlit pastures where their cattle grazed peacefully, unaware of the human dramas playing out around them. "Marcus, I need to ask you something, and I want a completely honest answer. Are you doing this because you care about Carmen and me as people, or because taking care of us makes you feel closer to Sarah?" It was a fair question, one Marcus had been asking himself as their arrangement became more permanent and complex. The answer required the kind of self-examination he'd been avoiding for 3 years. "Both, probably," he said finally. "But mostly the first. Elena, you and Carmen have given me something I didn't realize I'd lost, a reason to care about the future instead of just remembering the past. Sarah is part of why I was ready to help when you arrived, but she's not why I want you to stay." Elena smiled, relief evident in her expression. "Good answer. Because Carmen and I need to know we're building something real here, not just fulfilling someone else's unfinished dreams." As they headed back inside, where Carmen was reading quietly while both babies slept peacefully in their nursery, Marcus realized that Morrison's visit had actually strengthened rather than threatened their unconventional family. They'd faced their first real test together and emerged more committed to their shared future. The old ranch house settled around them with familiar creaks and sighs, but the sounds no longer spoke of isolation and grief. They spoke of home, of family, of people who'd chosen each other despite impossible circumstances and were determined to make their choice work. Outside, the motion sensors stood ready to detect any unwelcome visitors. Inside, 3 adults and 2 babies continued the complex work of building a life together, one that honored the past while embracing an uncertain but hopeful future. Marcus Callahan had wanted to sleep when his journey began, but he'd found something far more valuable, a reason to stay, awake and engaged with the world around him. 6 months after the blizzard that changed everything, Marcus found himself standing in what had once been Sarah's vegetable garden, watching Elena teach Isabella and Sophia to crawl through the soft spring grass. The babies, now 7 months old, had developed distinct personalities that delighted everyone on the ranch. Isabella was bold and determined, always reaching for objects just beyond her grasp, while Sophia was more contemplative, studying her surroundings with serious concentration before making careful movements. The garden itself had been transformed under Carmen's enthusiastic direction. What Sarah had struggled to maintain as a small patch of herbs and tomatoes had become a thriving operation that supplied fresh vegetables for their household and generated surplus for the farmers market in Missoula. Carmen had discovered a natural talent for growing things, approaching agriculture with the same systematic intelligence she'd once applied to hotel management. "The soil here is incredible," Carmen had explained to Marcus one morning as they planted rows of summer squash. Sarah must have spent years building up the organic content. It's like she was preparing it for someone who really knew how to use it. Elena looked up from where she was encouraging Isabella's attempts to reach a butterfly. "Marcus, I got confirmation this morning that our first agritourism guests will arrive next week. 3 families from Seattle, booked for the full ranch experience package." The agritourism venture had been Carmen's idea, but it required all their combined skills to implement. Elena handled logistics and safety protocols, drawing on her military experience to ensure guest activities were both exciting and secure. Marcus provided authentic ranch expertise, teaching visitors about cattle management, land stewardship, and the realities of agricultural life. Carmen orchestrated the hospitality aspects, creating experiences that felt genuine rather than manufactured. Their first season was modest, just 12 bookings spread across the summer months, but early feedback suggested they were creating something special. Guests appreciated the authentic working ranch atmosphere, the opportunity to participate in real agricultural activities, and what one review had called the most welcoming ranch family in Montana. "How are we looking for capacity?" Marcus asked, settling on the grass beside Elena as both babies investigated dandelions with serious concentration. "Good, but we'll need to hire seasonal help if we want to expand next year," Elena replied. "Tommy's been invaluable, but managing cattle operations and guest services simultaneously is stretching all of us pretty thin." Tommy had embraced the agritourism concept with surprising enthusiasm, discovering he enjoyed teaching visitors about ranching traditions and techniques. His weathered face and authentic cowboy demeanor made him exactly what city guests expected from a Montana ranch experience, but his genuine knowledge and patient teaching style made him genuinely valuable rather than merely atmospheric. The success of their various enterprises had transformed the ranch's financial situation from barely sustainable to genuinely prosperous. More importantly, it had given all of them a sense of building something meaningful together, not just surviving their circumstances, but thriving because of them. Carmen emerged from the house, carrying a tray of lemonade and what had become her signature contribution to their daily routine. Fresh baked goods that filled the old house with scents Sarah's kitchen had never produced. Her baking had started as a way to occupy time during recovery from childbirth, but it had evolved into both a source of personal satisfaction and a business opportunity. Local restaurants now ordered Carmen's breads and pastries regularly. "I got an interesting phone call this afternoon," Carmen announced as she distributed glasses of lemonade. "That was Maria Santos from the women's shelter in Kalispell. She wants to know if we'd be willing to participate in their new rural sanctuary program." Alina looked up sharply. "What kind of participation?" "Providing temporary housing for women and children fleeing domestic violence, using our ranch as a safe house while they transition to permanent placements. Maria thinks our location and security setup would be perfect for their most high-risk cases." Marcus felt his chest tighten with mixed emotions. The proposal touched something deep in his understanding of what their home should represent, but it also raised practical concerns about safety and complexity. "How would that work with our existing operations?" he asked. "Guests, cattle, business responsibilities?" Carmen settled on the blanket they'd spread for the babies, her expression thoughtful. Maria suggested starting small, maybe 2 or 3 placements per year, women whose situations are similar to what Elena and I faced. "We'd provide the same kind of sanctuary you gave us, help them establish new lives and identities." Elena was nodding slowly, her military mind already working through logistics. "It makes sense, actually. We have the infrastructure, the security, protocols, the experience of making women disappear from dangerous situations. And we know how transformative it can be when someone offers genuine sanctuary instead of temporary shelter." The conversation continued through the afternoon as they discussed practical implications, emotional considerations, and the ways such a program might affect their own family dynamics. Both babies had fallen asleep in the warm grass, Sophia curled against Carmen's leg while Isabella sprawled confidently across Elena's lap. "There's something else," Carmen said as the discussion wound down. "Maria mentioned that David hired another private investigator last month, someone more experienced and persistent than Morrison. She wanted us to know in case we saw signs of surveillance." The news cast a shadow over their peaceful afternoon, reminding all of them that their safety remained conditional rather than guaranteed. Elena's expression hardened into the tactical alertness Marcus had learned to recognize as her response to potential threats. "Any specific intelligence about methods or timeline?" Elena asked. "Just that this investigator specializes in finding people who don't want to be found, and David is apparently paying him very well for results. Maria's sources suggest he's working backwards from Morrison's last known lead, which means he'll probably end up here eventually." Marcus felt the familiar surge of protective anger that any mention of David triggered. The man's relentless pursuit of Carmen seemed driven by ego and control rather than any genuine caring, making his efforts feel particularly vindictive. "Let him come," Marcus said grimly. "Elena Martinez and Carmen Stewart have been living here for over 2 years. According to every document and witness he can check, Elena Rodriguez and Carmen Rodriguez have no connection to this ranch or anyone on it." Elena smiled at his fierce tone, but her expression remained serious. "I appreciate the confidence, Marcus, but we can't underestimate professional investigators. They look for inconsistencies, gaps in stories, details that don't quite align. We need to be even more careful about maintaining our cover identities." The security discussion that followed was more intensive than any they'd had since Morrison's visit. Elena had been monitoring local law enforcement communications, tracking any unusual activity or inquiries that might indicate renewed interest in their area. So far, their electronic countermeasures had detected no surveillance, but she recommended upgrading their systems anyway. The good news, Elena said as they gathered the sleeping babies and prepared to head inside, is that we're not the same vulnerable women who arrived here during that storm. We have resources now, allies, established. Lives that can withstand scrutiny. If David wants to find Carmen Rodriguez, he's going to keep hitting dead ends. That evening, as they settled into their routine of shared dinner preparation and childcare, Marcus reflected on how completely their lives had intertwined over the past months. Elena's tactical expertise had become essential to ranch security. Carmen's business instincts had opened new revenue streams they'd never considered. His own knowledge of the land and livestock provided the foundation that made everything else possible, more than professional partnership. Though, they'd developed the kind of emotional intimacy that characterized real families. Marcus knew that. Elena worried about whether her military background made her too hard, too strategic in her approach to relationships. Carmen struggled with guilt about bringing danger into their lives, even though she'd had no choice about being pursued. Elena and Carmen both worried about whether they were asking too much of Marcus, changing his life too dramatically from what he'd built with Sarah. For his part, Marcus had discovered that love didn't require replacing what he'd lost. It could build on it instead. His love for Sarah informed his capacity to care for Elena and Carmen, but it didn't diminish or compete with those new relationships. Sarah would have adored both women, would have been delighted by the babies, would have embraced every aspect of their unconventional family arrangement that the next morning brought their first agritourism guests, the Seattle families Elena had mentioned, arriving in 2 SUVs loaded with city dwellers eager to experience authentic ranch life. Marcus watched Elena and Carmen shift seamlessly into their professional roles, welcoming visitors with warm efficiency, while maintaining the security protocols that had become second nature. The eldest guest child, a boy of about 10 immediately, gravitated toward the baby corral where Isabella and Sophia were enjoying supervised outdoor time. "Can I hold one of them?" he asked Carmen with the directness of children. "If you sit down carefully and let me show you how," Carmen replied, clearly delighted by his interest. "Isabella here is very social. She loves meeting new people." Watching Carmen guide the boy through proper baby-holding techniques, seeing his face light up when Isabella grabbed his finger, Marcus was struck by how naturally she'd adapted to motherhood, despite the traumatic circumstances surrounding Sophia's conception. Elena had mentioned that Carmen worried about her capacity to love a child who reminded her of David, but there was no evidence of anything but complete devotion in the way she cared for her daughter. The morning's ranch activities went smoothly, with guests participating in cattle feeding, learning basic roping techniques, and helping with garden maintenance. Elena supervised the more adventurous activities, while Marcus provided running commentary about ranching traditions and environmental stewardship. Carmen managed the logistics of meals, equipment, and the constant questions that characterize curious visitors. It was during the afternoon horseback riding session that Marcus noticed the black sedan parked on a hilltop about a mile from the ranch buildings. The vehicle was positioned to provide clear sight lines to the main house and barn area, but far enough away to avoid easy detection. Elena spotted it at the same time, her hand moving instinctively to the radio clipped to her belt. "Tommy," she said quietly into the device, "we've got a watcher on the eastern ridge. Same type of vehicle Morrison was driving." Tommy's voice crackled back immediately. "I see it. Been there for about 20 minutes. Want me to take a closer look?" "Negative. Maintain normal operations, but keep guests away from the eastern pasture. I'll handle surveillance." Marcus admired Elena's calm professionalism, even as his own anger flared at this intrusion into their carefully built sanctuary. The presence of guests actually provided excellent cover for their normal activities. Any investigator watching would see a successful agritourism operation rather than the safe house they were really observing. The surveillance continued for 3 hours during which Alina tracked the watcher's movements using equipment Marcus hadn't known she possessed. By evening, when their guests were settled around a campfire listening to Tommy's stories about traditional ranching, the black sedan had disappeared. "Professional job," Alina reported as they gathered in the kitchen after their guests had retired. To the renovated bunkhouse. High-end surveillance equipment, coordinated timing, systematic photography of buildings, vehicles, and personnel. This isn't David's previous investigator. This is someone much more sophisticated. Carmen held Sophia closer, her face pale with renewed fear. "What does that mean for us?" "It means we're dealing with someone who'll eventually figure out that Elena Martinez and Carmen Stewart weren't always Elena Martinez and Carmen Stewart," Elena said bluntly. "The question is whether our documentation and cover stories will hold up under that level of scrutiny." Marcus looked between the two women who'd become so central to his life, at the babies who'd filled his house with joy and laughter, at the evidence of prosperity and purpose that surrounded them. "Then we make sure they hold up," he said firmly. "Whatever that takes." Alina smiled at his determination, but her expression remained serious. "Marcus, whatever that takes, might include some very difficult decisions. If this investigator gets too close, if our cover identities start to unravel, Carmen and I might have to disappear again. Start over somewhere else with new names, new lives." The thought of losing them, of returning to the empty house and solitary existence he'd known before the storm, hit Marcus with surprising force. Over the past months, Elena and Carmen hadn't just become partners in ranch operations, they'd become family in the truest sense. Their loss would be devastating in ways he was only beginning to understand. "No," he said with quiet intensity. "We don't run. We've built something worth defending here, and we defend it. All of us together." Carmen looked up from Sophia with tears in her eyes. "Marcus, you don't understand what these men are capable of. David won't stop until he gets what he wants, and what he wants is control. If he can't have me back, he'll destroy whatever life I've built without him. Then he'll have to go through me first," Marcus replied simply. "And Elena, and Tommy, and every other person who believes you deserve to live without fear." Elena was studying Marcus's face with the analytical intensity she brought to tactical planning. "You're talking about making a stand instead of strategic withdrawal. That's emotionally satisfying, but it's also dangerous for everyone involved. Sometimes, dangerous is better than constantly running," Marcus said. "Sarah used to say that you can't build a real life if you're always looking over your shoulder. Maybe it's time to stop looking over our shoulders." The conversation continued past midnight as they weighed options, assessed risks, and planned responses to various scenarios. But by the time they finally headed to bed, a fundamental decision had been made. They weren't running anymore. Whatever challenges David's investigator might bring, they would face them together as a family united in defense of the life they'd built. The confrontation came on a Tuesday morning in late August, when the Montana summer was at its peak and the ranch was bustling with their most successful agritourism season yet. Marcus was leading a group of guests through cattle herding exercises when Elena's voice crackled urgently over the radio. "Multiple vehicles approaching from 3 directions. This isn't surveillance anymore. This is a coordinated operation." Through the dust cloud raised by their practice cattle drive, Marcus could see what Elena meant. A black sedan approached from the main road while 2 SUVs flanked them from the north and south access routes. The timing was clearly planned to prevent escape, and the coordination suggested professional execution. "Tommy, get our guests back to the lodge and keep them there," Marcus commanded, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd made peace with whatever was coming. "Elena, initiate lockdown protocols." The guests, sensing the sudden tension but not understanding its source, followed Tommy's calm directions toward the main house. Marcus rode hard toward the ranch buildings, knowing that Elena and Carmen would already be implementing the security measures they'd rehearsed but hoped never to use. He found Elena in the kitchen, calmly checking the secure communication system, while Carmen gathered essential documents from the fireproof safe they'd installed months earlier. Both babies were in their carriers, ready for rapid evacuation if necessary. But both women moved with purposeful efficiency rather than panic. Status. Report, Marcus said, dismounting quickly and joining them at the kitchen window. 6 men total, professional bearing, no visible weapons, but definitely armed. Elena replied, scanning the approaching vehicles through high-powered binoculars. The lead sedan has David Vega in the passenger seat. Carmen's face went white at the mention of her ex-husband's name, but her hands remained steady as she continued organizing their emergency supplies. He came himself this time. That means he's confident about the outcome. The vehicle stopped about 50 yards from the house, positioned to provide clear fields of fire while maintaining defensive positions. Marcus felt his jaw tighten as he watched 6 men emerge from the cars, their movements coordinated and professional. David Vega stepped out of the lead sedan, and even at a distance, Marcus could see the arrogant confidence that had made him dangerous to the women he'd claimed to love. Elena Rodriguez and Carmen Rodriguez, David called out, his voice carrying clearly across the ranch yard. I know you're in there. I've spent a fortune finding you, and I'm not leaving without what belongs to me. Elena moved to the kitchen door, opening it just enough to be heard while maintaining cover behind the reinforced frame. I'm sorry, sir, but there's no one here by those names. This is a working ranch, and you're trespassing on private property. David's laugh was cold and calculating. Really? Because my investigator has some very interesting photographs. Elena. Martinez bears a remarkable resemblance to Elena Rodriguez, doesn't she? And that baby she's always carrying looks exactly like Carmen's daughter. The investigator David mentioned stepped forward, a lean man in his 50s who carried himself with the bearing of someone accustomed to getting results through intimidation. We know who you are, ladies. We know what you've been doing here, and we know the rancher has been helping you hide. This can go easy or hard, but it's going to go. Marcus had heard enough. He stepped onto the kitchen porch, his rifle held in a relaxed but ready position. Gentlemen, you're on my land, you're threatening my family, and you're disturbing my guests. I'm going to ask you once to leave peacefully. David's attention focused on Marcus with laser intensity. Your family? That's interesting, rancher. Because Carmen Rodriguez is my wife, and that baby she stole is my daughter. I'm here to collect my property. Carmen Stewart is a guest worker on my ranch, Marcus replied evenly. She's not your wife, that's not your daughter, and they're not your property. You've got 30 seconds to get back in your vehicles and leave. The investigator stepped closer, his hand moving toward his jacket. Mr. Callahan, you're interfering with the recovery of a kidnapped child. That's a federal crime. Stand aside and let us collect the fugitives. Elena appeared beside Marcus, her own weapon visible but not threatening. Actually, gentlemen, you're the ones committing crimes here. Armed trespass, harassment, making false claims about federal authority. I've got it all on video, and it's being transmitted to actual law enforcement as we speak. The standoff continued for several tense minutes, with David growing increasingly agitated as his intimidation tactics failed to produce results. Marcus could see the man's frustration building, the dangerous anger that Elena and Carmen had described taking hold as his careful plan encountered unexpected resistance. You think hiding behind new names changes anything? David snarled, his composure finally cracking. I know Carmen is in there. I know she has my daughter. And I know this rancher thinks he can play hero by protecting them. Carmen's voice came from behind Elena, steady and clear despite the circumstances. David, I left you because you put me in the hospital. I stayed gone because you threatened to kill me if I ever tried to leave again. Sophia is safe here, and she's going to stay safe. David's face flushed with rage at hearing Carmen's voice. You can't keep what's mine, Carmen. I've spent everything I have tracking you down, and I'm not going home empty-handed." "Then you shouldn't have come at all," Marcus said quietly. "Because you're not taking anyone from this ranch." The next few moments unfolded with the terrible clarity that comes with genuine crisis. David lunged toward his investigator's weapon while screaming orders at his other men. Elena moved with military precision, disabling the investigator before he could draw his gun. Marcus kept his rifle trained on David while shouting warnings that went unheeded. The actual violence was brief but decisive. Elena's training proved superior to whatever experience David's hired men possessed. Marcus's intimate knowledge of his own property gave him tactical advantages the intruders couldn't match. Tommy appeared from the barn with his own rifle, having circled around to provide covering fire from an unexpected angle. When the dust settled, David Vega was face down in the ranch yard dirt, zip-tied with restraints Elena had produced from somewhere, while his associates were similarly secured. The investigator who'd seemed so confident minutes earlier was nursing a dislocated shoulder and demanding lawyers he wouldn't be seeing anytime soon. "Sheriffs are en route," Elena announced, lowering her radio. "ETA 15 minutes. I've got multiple felony charges documented with video evidence, plus outstanding warrants that should keep Mr. Vega occupied for a very long time." Carmen emerged from the house carrying Sophia, her face pale but determined. She walked slowly toward where David lay restrained, looking down at the man who'd terrorized her for years with an expression Marcus had never seen before. Not fear, not anger, but something like pity. "You did this to yourself, David," she said quietly. "You could have let us go, could have built a life with someone who actually wanted to be with you. Instead, you spent everything chasing something you never really had." David lifted his head from the dirt, his face contorted with rage and disbelief. "This isn't over, Carmen. Lawyers, appeals, custody battles. I'll find a way to get my daughter back." Elena knelt beside him, her voice carrying the cold authority of someone who dealt with dangerous men in much more hostile environments. "Actually, David, it is over. You see, Carmen Rodriguez was never married to you. That marriage was bigamous because you were already married to someone else at the time. Carmen Stewart has documentation proving Sophia's father is unknown. And David Vega is about to be convicted of multiple felonies that will put him away for a very long time." The elegant trap Elena had constructed over months of careful planning became clear as she explained David's legal situation to the arriving sheriff's deputies. Every aspect of his pursuit, every crime he'd committed in trying to reclaim what he thought was his, had been documented and preserved as evidence. His hired investigator faced charges for impersonating federal officers, while his other associates were looking at armed trespass and conspiracy charges. As David and his men were loaded into patrol cars, Sheriff Rebecca Walsh took statements from Marcus, Elena, and Carmen. Walsh had been briefed on their situation months earlier through Elena's law enforcement contacts, and she handled the aftermath with professional competence and genuine compassion. "This should be the end of it," Walsh told them as the last patrol car disappeared down the ranch road. "Between the charges he's facing and the restraining orders we'll be filing, Mr. Vega won't be bothering anyone for a very long time." The immediate crisis was over, but its aftermath revealed how much their unconventional family had evolved under pressure. Elena moved through the ranch buildings, systematically checking security systems and documenting evidence with military precision. Carmen comforted their shaken guests, explaining the situation as a domestic dispute that had been resolved through proper legal channels. Marcus coordinated with Tommy to ensure ranch operations continued smoothly despite the disruption. But it was that evening, after their guests had been reassured and accommodated, after statements had been given and evidence preserved, that the real significance of the day became clear. They gathered in the living room where it had all started, the same room where Elena had first proposed staying permanently. where they'd planned their new life together during those early uncertain weeks. "So," Elena said, settling into her familiar chair with Isabella on her lap, "we survived our first real test as a family. How does it feel?" Carmen looked up from where she was feeding Sophia, her expression thoughtful. "It feels like freedom. Actually, for the first time since I met David, I'm not afraid anymore. Not of him, not of being found, not of what might happen tomorrow." Marcus nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. The confrontation had been terrifying while it lasted, but its resolution had eliminated the constant low-level fear that had shadowed their lives for months. They were no longer refugees hiding from the past. They were a family defending their home. "I keep thinking about what David said," Carmen continued, "about how spending everything he had to track us down. It makes me realize how much we've gained while he was focused on what he'd lost." Elena smiled, bouncing Isabella gently on her knee. "We've built something he never understood how to create. A partnership based on mutual respect instead of control. A home built on trust instead of fear." Over the following weeks, as legal proceedings against David and his associates moved through the courts, life on the ranch settled into new rhythms. Their agritourism operation expanded as word spread about their authentic hospitality and dramatic setting. Carmen's garden produced record harvests that supplied both their household and local restaurants. Elena's security consulting business, launched to help other domestic violence survivors, brought in additional income while serving the cause she cared about deeply. But the most significant change was subtler. The way they moved through their days without the constant awareness of potential threat, the freedom to plan for years rather than months, the simple pleasure of calling their lives their own. Marcus found himself thinking often about Sarah. During those autumn months, not with the paralyzing grief that had defined him for so long, but with gratitude for the love she'd taught him and the foundation she'd helped him build. Sarah would have adored Elena and Carmen, would have delighted in Isabella and Sophia, would have embraced every aspect of their unconventional family with her characteristic enthusiasm. One evening in October, as the first snow of the season dusted the mountains and they gathered around the dinner table that now accommodated high chairs and sippy cups alongside adult conversation, Elena raised a toast with her coffee mug. "To Marcus Callahan," she said solemnly, "who wanted sleep but found something much better. To Sarah, who taught him how to love in ways that made room for all of us. And to the storm that brought us together when we all needed each other most." Carmen raised her own mug, smiling at Marcus across the table. "To second chances, new families, and homes that shelter exactly the people who need them." Marcus looked around the table at faces that had become as familiar and precious as Sarah's had once been, at babies who called him Papa Marcus and filled his house with laughter, at women who'd transformed his grief into purpose and his isolation into community. The widowed rancher who'd wanted nothing more than peaceful sleep had discovered something infinitely more valuable, a reason to stay, awake and engaged with the beautiful complexity of life. Outside, snow continued to fall on the Montana ranch where 3 adults and 2 babies had built something unprecedented out of desperation, determination, and the kind of love that grows stronger under pressure. Inside, the old house that had once echoed with silence now resonated with the sounds of family, not the family Marcus had originally planned, but the family he'd been given when he needed it most. Sarah had always believed that everything happened for a reason. As Marcus watched Elena help Carmen with the babies while discussing plans for next year's ranch improvements, he finally understood what she'd meant. Sometimes the best things in life came not from careful planning, but from opening your heart to possibilities you'd never imagined and trusting that love had room to grow in directions you'd never expected. The storm had passed long ago, but what it brought to his doorstep would warm Marcus Callahan's home for the rest of his life. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.